What's the good word, Jets fans? It's your boy DKB here. We're getting into another head coach candidate breakdown. And I'm more excited than I expected to be today covering Detroit Lions defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn. Obviously, some history and stuff that I learned about, kind of digging into a little bit about his scheme and things. But hearing what, excuse me, not only people that are familiar with him are saying, but even people from more of a global standpoint, if you will, have some intriguing comments about what he brings to the table, why they think not that he'll just be a head coach candidate, but that he has a strong possibility to finally enter those finalist standings, right? You think about him interviewing since about 2022, Saints, Commanders, Falcons, Chargers, Titans, all of these teams that ended up going elsewhere. And it made a little bit of sense at the time. I know Detroit was just starting to have that turnaround, but he's not having the level of success that he's having this year that he had prior. So I would, what I know up front is that the Saints are one of the strongest contenders for him out the gate to replace Dennis Allen. So we'll see how that pans out. But from the New York Jets perspective, I can see this not only being a Robert Saleh 2.0 is what I envision in my head, right? I hear a lot of good things about his ability to adapt, his ability to go out there and lead, and what his leadership style looks like and things. But I think that he has not only more connections, I think his decision-making ability may be better based on what he's been able to experience with Detroit. And he's actually already taken some steps, in my opinion, that are huge to address some of the criticisms that he would potentially receive as being just another glorified DC, right? When you talk about all of the head coaches that we've had that have been more of defensive specialists in New York. But I think it's a perfect storyline for Woody Johnson, a hometown hero, homegrown, all-pro beast that returns to rebuild and establish the New York Jets to the dominance that not only did he experience, but that we really were accustomed to seeing in the early 2000s and the 90s, right? So getting into a little bit of his background, right? He's coming in at 52 years old. There's a reason for him just kind of getting some head coach looks here, but let's talk about the history to kind of dive into that a little bit. So he's under the tutelage of effectively Mike Pettine, former Jets DC, and then Sean Payton, and both of those coming either from his experience being a former Jets player, where, if you guys aren't familiar, former first-round pick of the Jets, 12th pick in the 1994 draft. He was a two-time All-Pro, I believe 3-time Pro Bowler, and then he even ended up moving into the scouting ranks for the New York Jets as a pro personnel scout, I believe around the 2012 season, somewhere in that area. But by the time he decided to actually get into coaching, he started off with the Browns as an assistant DB coach and then ended up moving into an assistant secondary coach with an emphasis on cornerbacks, which you would expect with his playing background. Then he moves to the Saints, becomes a official DB coach and then a secondary coach, again, kind of specializing in the cornerback room. And then he finds his way to the Lions with Dan Campbell, I believe going back to their playing days where they had some overlap. So that brings us up to speed there, right? Now, one of the things that I really, really love, and I want to dive into some scheme here before we get into the background with him, is this is going to be a completely different style of play, a different consistent coverage that we wouldn't have seen since prior to Robert Saleh being here. Rex Ryan obviously deployed a 3-4, which will be slightly different from what he generally operates here as well. But not to say this would be a seamless transition per se, But I think with the pieces we know will be on this roster on the defense, a Quinnen Williams, a Sauce Gardner, some of the young bucks that are there like JBC and Quantez Stiggers, safety room will be completely revamped. But then you have, we'll see what the decisions made are for a guy like Jamin Sherwood. But you have Quincy, you have Jermaine Johnson that's coming back, you have Will McDonald that broke out. So a lot of pieces to love, and with the body types and the skill sets that a lot of these guys offer, excuse me, there's ability to adapt to a new scheme as long as you are doing wholesale changes, 4-3 to 3-4, etc., etc. But he likes to really run cover one. He employs a ton of man coverage, operates out of quarters. Two deep safety looks as kind of the primary packages you'll see get rolled out to let you know the style of defense that he's going to be rocking with. He leads the NFL in man coverage usage, and I believe they're at about 43% of the time. So think about half of the game is mano a mano out there, putting guys out on an island and hoping that the blitz can get to the quarterback or the standard rush package, whatever that may be. But he trusts a lot of these guys they have. And keep in mind, Detroit doesn't really have all-star household names in their secondary right now. They're starting to build a lot of those reputations, but there's a lot of rookies there. There's a lot of second-year players, and then maybe one or two veterans that are out there. Also, he has an emphasis on safety play. So where we've seen the approach from Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas that they can just pick up highly athletic guys and get them developed within a system, which we've seen to various levels of success. Not to say that this means that Aaron Glenn-led team would start investing significant resources in the safety room, but he's not just going to leave it as a foregone conclusion either. And you can also argue that they have the potential best safety tandem in the NFL right now. They're rolling out Brian Branch from Bama and Kirby Joseph. I can't remember where he plays off the top of my head. I want to say OSU, but that's not it. But nonetheless, heavy influences for him outside of him being trained up by Mike Pettine and Sean Payton is definitely kind of if you looked at his scheme, you can make an argument that it's a blend on the front and back end of Vic Fangio and Greg Williams. And those are both kind of stalwart names. Obviously, Williams come with a bit of, some blemishes on his record, but we've seen what both of these style of defenses can do. And with Aaron Glenn, he's been able to make the most of both of them. Now, kind of moving forward, right? Once Aaron Glenn didn't have a straight path, right? Played for a long time, decided to get some experience coaching, working with the Jets front office, but he obviously brings his own accolades, right? Let's start there, because I think when you mention former players, many people just settle for the fact that you played, you know what the NFL is like and stuff, but there's a little bit of a different hue to the conversation when you consider a guy that has really balled out at every level he's been at, right? Aaron Glenn originally played at Navarro College, then moved to Texas A&M, but he was an All-American. Obviously lettered on his way up. Could have potentially been, a Heisman candidate and stuff, which is the way he was playing, but he did successful enough to work his way into being a first-round pick, and then again, All-Pro, Pro Bowl status caliber guy here. Bill Parcells was his head coach during the New York Jets tenure for a little bit there. And so you think about all of the different names so far that he's already been attached to, that he has connections with, that he can lean into when it comes to figuring out some of these coaching things. And I'd be willing to bet on it that he's already done just that over his course with the Detroit Lions so far. And let's also not forget, I know Aaron Glenn's the hot name right now, but when he got there, I want to say 2021, they didn't have instant success, right? It's not the same situation that we saw with Robert Saleh and the New York Jets, but the Detroit Lions fan base was calling for his head often and early, and Dan Campbell was able to stick with them and work it out. And it looks like a stroke of brilliance, a move of genius by Campbell, because Aaron Glenn was able to figure it out. You take a look at the construction of that team, and Detroit was primed to have an offensive outburst, but there really wasn't a ton going on defensively. And so Aaron Glenn is really not necessarily just scrapping a bunch of the pieces like we saw with the Jets as well, but really figuring out which guys, essentially setting the foundation, right? Here is our process, here's our mentality, here's our identity, here is the style of play that we expect, right? That's kind of the year one rebuild for him. Year two, I got some prime resources locked in. We're going to start figuring out which guys we can really start to build around, and that's when you see your Aiden Hutchinson come. That's when you see him building around Jack. I always want to say Jack Harlow or Jack Conklin, and that's not it. But the middle linebacker that they took, that's when you see them take Eric Rakestraw. In the secondary, Brian Branch. They bring over Kirby Joseph. There's a few other names that we'll highlight here as well, just in terms of the impact that he's had on him. But some numbers to know, right, in terms of what he's been able to do within the span of the last year, or even some of the last 2 years in this instance. But they're second in interceptions. They're third in takeaways and quarterback pressure. They're fourth in red zone stops. Fifth in points allowed per game, and I believe Detroit is the only team to actually boast a top 5 offense and top 5 defense. And one of the most important ones here, they're first in third down defense, which means that they are getting off of the field. They're allowing their defense to rest. They can go back, make adjustments without worrying about having to be right back on the field 45 seconds later, because the offense is going 3 and out. And so it's really the most ideal version of playing team ball, right? Having that synergy in the offense being able to put up points, the defense being able to get takeaways or stop points from going on the board. And then, of course, with special teams, being able to get the rare, huge play, whether that's a block punt, field goal, touchdown return, fumble, etc., etc. But getting back into things, so he's had a high level of success everywhere. He has talents like Bill Parcells to lean on, and Ben Johnson now, Dan Campbell, guys like Mike Pettine and Sean Payton, for example, highly effective guys that he's seen over the course of his career. But he's a little bit more well-rounded than you think. Not only did he get some early front office work with the New York Jets, but he also ended up being a GM for the Houston Stallions, which was a Lone Star Football League team, and they were undefeated 7-0 until operations got shut down, and I don't know what exactly happened there, but he's been able to do a little bit of everything, right? A little GM, a little front office, and then mostly the coaching and playing experience. So this is a guy that's really kind of battle tested. And speaking of battle tested, one of the things that I don't want to get lost on anybody is that his defenses have been going up against Ben Johnson, and Ben Johnson's been getting praised since they got down, right? So you have two differing story evolutions here. You have the offense, which hit the ground running and was really the igniter for turning this Detroit team around, and then the defense caught up. And so to me, what that says is not only has Ben Johnson been able to outright and expectedly so beat out the early versions of Detroit's defense, but then you really start to get the iron sharpening iron effect. And I know it's one of those common cliches that you really hear, but in this case, the proof is in the pudding. Top 5 offense, top 5 defense, and these guys generally aren't going against a ton of teams that are more well coached or more well-rounded, stocked, talented than they are. So it's one of the things that, I can only imagine what our team would look like, right, if we had a Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn on our side, and how they were getting things to pan out here. Also, from a recruiting standpoint, and I don't have any names specifically, but if you were to hire a Ben Johnson, which I didn't talk about this point with Ben Johnson, but is worth bringing up now with Aaron Glenn, he has a bevy of resources with Detroit that he can pull from, a coaching staff that many people would love to pluck, right? You would imagine Ben Johnson tries to steal a ton of guys first, but depending on who gets hired, there are a lot of guys on either side of that ball that you would feel really, really good about being able to be a starting point for the coaching staff that he pieces together. Stress testing his defense is one of the things that is most important to me, though, and I think for all of us as fans as well, right? The injury history for the Jets, it's been absolutely crazy, absolutely ridiculous, but even if you take injury out, there has been a ton of critical games, a ton of key games where we really haven't stepped up, right? We didn't even play to our talent level. I can't even say we played down to the level of the talent that we were facing. We just completely fall apart, right? And consistently what you hear is the energy was low. We just didn't really seem like we came out with a ton of fire and lack of starting fast, which is normally a common theme for the New York Jets. And then obviously we can't put anybody away because we don't have that killer instinct. But the identity piece that is so crucial for this team and something that it feels like we had up until the point that Robert Saleh was fired is that even when injuries come into play, there shouldn't be a steep drop off, right? Unless you just have maybe one all-star type guy at a certain position and then not much behind him. But in general, you should be able to compensate for a couple of key injuries. Nobody's really done it better than Detroit. Marcus Davenport they lost, Aiden Hutchinson, Alex Anzalone, and in each of those cases where they lost those guys, it feels like, and I'm pretty sure this is the case, the following week were blowout games. And not only was it huge offensive outings of 28 plus points or so, in some cases 30, 40, 50 or more. But the defense also was holding guys to, 10, 13 points or less, which is huge, which means it's both sides of the ball, again, still being complimentary. So that is one of the things that I absolutely love. And walking in the door, he might not have a ton of accolades to his name per se, but he was the number one rated player approved coordinator in the NFL, which is huge because it means that the players respond to him. And if you know anything about the personality and stuff from watching interviews or just seeing on the sideline or even just paying attention to the player comments, this isn't necessarily a player-friendly guy in terms of I want to be buddy-buddy best friends. It's very much so we're getting the job done. Here's how I want it to look. Here's how I expect it to be executed. And I want it done consistently. Players have been responding to that. I think he definitely has a level of patience that matches or possibly exceeds Robert Saleh when it comes to letting some of these guys develop. But it all starts with being able to buy into what he's establishing. And I think that entire team has definitely been able to do that. His motto from a leadership perspective comes down to influence. He's not caring about what do these guys think? What are they saying about me per se? It is what can I do to influence these guys to be their best versions of themselves? And that's definitely a huge stark difference, right? One thing is just wishing, hoping, and assuming somebody will buy into your process. He is actively pursuing getting that done, right? And so if you fail, it obviously can come down to coaching to some degree, but for the most part, it gives me the feeling that player just wasn't suited to what they wanted to do. And that's also something that he puts a high priority and standard on, is bringing guys in through the door to begin with that from a mental genetic makeup is going to be on brand with what he's looking to see out there on Sundays. And part of developing himself, right? So let's make it come full circle here. One of the things I love, and I can't say whether other coordinators or first-time head coaches are doing this to any degree, but it was worth highlighting in that he frequently visits offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators, not just at the NFL level, but at the college level, and he talks through things like game prep and how they're going about game planning and different things of that nature. So not only is he building an understanding for the opposite side of the ball that he likes, but defensively, he can incorporate some cool things he's seeing at the college level or around the NFL that he can borrow from and implement within his system as part of an ever-evolving defense. And I think that's really, really key here. So What I'll leave you with is some of the comments from various members across the NFL that I saw as it pertained to Ben Johnson, just to leave you guys on a positive note here. From Aaron Glenn himself, this was about what you can expect from him when it comes to at least the defensive side of the ball, but in terms of being a head coach, the overall philosophy. A tough, physical, violent operation that loves to play man coverage. And I know the last part is going to apply more to defense, but this is something I love. And by the way, the fact that we would be playing a ton of man coverage, this could be the bounce back and the inspiration that Sauce Gardner needs to not only get back to those all-pro levels we've seen his first 2 years. This could skyrocket him into that Darrelle Revis type level. And I know it puts a huge strain on the body, maybe shave some year off the career. But I think we've all wanted to see Sauce Gardner go mano-a-mano with the best consistently all game long, if not at least the majority of the game, and really shut down these weapons. And that could potentially happen under Aaron Glenn, which would be something I'm extremely excited for, especially considering, again, some of the stockpile of players we have behind them, like the Stiggers, who I'm high on, and I love what JBC Jerk Bernard Converse showed during the offseason. So outside of that, Dan Campbell himself mentioned nobody works harder or longer than he does, and I've seen that echoed throughout Dan Campbell, Ben Johnson, Dan Fritz or Pips, something like that, who I believe is on the offensive side for Detroit, echoed the same thing. And then the Rod Graves, the leader of the group that advises the NFL on diversity, equity, and inclusion hirings, mentioned that he'll be one of the strongest candidates coming up. And, I highlighted for you guys earlier, it looks like the Saints may be one of the first early contenders for him. But considering they just let go of Robert Saleh, considering we let go of Joe Douglas, obviously we want to get that GM position locked in first, but this should be one of the first guys that I feel like they're calling. Ranking wise, after looking at him, I don't know where I want to place him. Ben Johnson is up there, and I feel like rightfully so. Aaron Glenn potentially should be next to him, at least from a defensive standpoint, in terms of being his counterpart. But I would probably go Ben Johnson. Who do I have right now? I think it's Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick, Mike Vrabel, Cliff Kingsbury. I feel like I'm missing somebody, but this might be our fifth. Aaron Glenn. Where would I slide him in between here? I want to say I probably have to drop him below Mike Vrabel just because of the first-year head coach knock that I think a lot of us will put on him. But realistically, I think he would be I think I like what I've seen and heard from him defensively more so than maybe Mike Vrabel. But it's debatable. Let me know what you guys ultimately think about it. I'll catch you again. Peace.